Hello everyone and welcome to this video. In our Reengineering the Chess Classic series, I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and after all the craziness of the past videos, we're going to have a look at a little bit of Dawid Janowski's endgame technique. Janowski had a really bad reputation as a poor endgame player. Capablanca recounted the story that he'd said to Janowski that if he just improved his endgames, then a lot of his losses would actually disappear. And Janowski is supposed to have replied, "I hate endgames." But in all fairness, you look at his play in endgames, and he had some bad ones, but that's true of all classic players, and hush, don't say it, even modern players as well. And he also played a number of fine endgames, and this game, played in the match against Frank Marshall in 1905, is a very nice example of that. This match actually is quite funny because Marshall had a bit of a checkered history in matches. He lost very heavily, of course, to Emanuel Lasker, just like Janowski did as well. And he also lost very heavily to Siegbert Tarrasch as well. But to Dawid Janowski, he beat +8 -5 = 4. It was a very tight match, but at the end Marshall pulled away, and maybe Janowski got a bit disheartened by one of his losses and just won. But Janowski was not a particularly good loser, and whenever he lost a game, he had some sort of Korchnoi-esque habits, and one of them was to say that was to offer the opponent a match where he would give him a pawn and move handicap. I think Rudolf Spielmann said that he was offered this after beating Janowski in a game. And with Frank Marshall, after the match had concluded, Janowski sent out a letter saying that he didn't accept that Marshall was better than him, and he'd be happy to play him in a fresh match, giving him a 4-game start. So it's a little bit risky there. I think actually that they played another match a little bit later, and Marshall won that match as well. Very tight, interesting games, but at the end Marshall just won more games. But how did this game come about? It was a very nice queenless middle game grind from Janowski. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight c3, knight f6, bishop g5, knight d7, e3, bishop e7. Queen's Gambit declined, and Frank Marshall, just like Janowski actually, never played any of these subtle ideas with knight f3, waiting before black takes on c4 before playing bishop takes c4 in one go. He just developed his bishop to d3 and just let it all happen. And Janowski doesn't really try and exploit this at all. He just plays the move b6, knight to f3, and bishop b7. C takes d5 and e takes d5. Now, knight takes d5 became that's become basically the general reaction nowadays to this exchange. The Tartakova sort of inspired lines where he basically black tries to exchange off 2 sets of minor pieces, and then just claims that with the 2 sets of minor pieces exchanged, black's got less space, but there's many fewer pieces that he has to accommodate in his limited space, so there's no problem. But Janowski played e takes d5. That's the old-fashioned way, and it's not bad at all. I mean, black's got a pretty solid centre. He's going to be nicely developed. King's going to go into to the king's side, be nice and safe there. Nothing wrong to start with. So castles played, c5 here. Rook c1 and castles here, and here Marshall played something not so great really. He played the move knight e5. Now obviously this is trying to set up the sort of the Pillsbury structure, f4, and then we'll go queen f3 to h3 or rook f3 to h3. Black does white's takes a move before he gets his desired structure, and Janowski takes the opportunity here to exchange pieces and just neutralize what white's trying to do. What the engine suggested, and this is quite a nice idea, is to go bishop f5, and the idea is that if black plays knight e4, well, the bishop's sort of ahead of that really. It's we've got pressure against d7, pressure against e7, going to be a bit tricky for black there. So Yeah, I mean, a typical idea would be rook e8, g6, and then the bishop moves back to h3. It's a little bit weird, but this pressure along here is quite awkward. For example, rook c8 just puts black into a pin. Quite interesting little idea there. And, well, at some stage as well, white can just take on d7, take on c5, and, you know, you've weakened black's defense of this c-pawn. So this is quite typical. What Marshall did was play knight e5, and Janowski just took and went knight e4. And, yeah, here again, Frank Marshall took a bit of a strange decision. I think he was trying to, you know, trying to make something of this, you know, trying to make pretend in a way that that he still had an advantage. And well, this didn't work out too well for him. The engines want bishop f4 here, for example, and well, black plays something maybe like queen e8, for example. Queen f3, queen c6 was a nice idea of dragons, and then you know, the rook's going to come to d8, and you know, black's just got a nice position here, really. But Marshall took on e4, took the queens off, and then played this move bishop f4. And I think the idea of this really was that you know, white's aiming to play rook d1. You've moved a bishop to the d8 square, so you're going to play rook d1, and maybe you're thinking knight d5 or knight b5 to d6. But somehow, yeah, you know, white's just a little bit too slow here, really, and he doesn't have time to do any of this stuff. And actually, you know, well, you know, black's actually going to have this very nice outpost on d3 for the rooks, and this is going to prove quite important. Now, the engines actually wanted to play g5 and f5 straight away. This was stockfish, and the idea is, well, you're threatening f4 already, so white takes on f6, but you go bishop f6. You've got rid of this pawn, got rid of the potential outpost, and you're just ready to play, you know, stuff like rook d8 to d3, for example. The engine also wants h5 as well. Actually, stockfish beat dragon from this position quite convincingly. Just have a look at what happened. h5, he took there, rook d8, rook d7, throw in a little h3 there, rook c8, knight f5, rook f8. Just, yeah, white finds it hard to sort of get going on there, and yeah, black's very, very active. You know, it's quite interesting there. But what Janowski did was very sensible as well. Just bishop e7 and just preparing to put a rook on the d file. So rook d1 was played, rook d8, and now knight b5. And yeah, Marshall's looking to get a knight on d6. But actually, you know, the engine is just not worried about that at all. The engine's just wanted to take, go bishop c6, and then start undermining the knight with f6. And yeah, you know, little advantage for black here. But what Janowski did again was very, very natural. Just rook d3. You know, you're just getting ahead, just like that move bishop f5, got ahead of knight e4. You play rook d3 to get ahead of knight d6. And well, in actual fact, how Marshall played it from here is actually the engine's main line. And yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I thought that that Janowski was doing really, really well, but the engine seemed to think that it's okay. You know, just one of those strange things. So knight d6, bishop d5, b3. Just protecting the attack. g5 from black, just weakening this f5 square, it's true, but you know, giving the king some escape square there. Bishop g3, and now a5. And well, I mean, Janowski's just going to go a4 and attack these pawns. I mean, I actually thought that the black had a clear advantage here, but the engines feel that it's still okay for white. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, from a human perspective, feels very good for black. So f3, and now a4, f takes e4, takes, and bishop e6. And, well, I mean, white has won a pawn. In all fairness, has got some interesting outposts for his knight. But, you know, you can only use one at a time, really. So, you know, it's not always clear where that knight has to be. And on the other hand, you know, queenside pawn majority, and this bishop is helping to attack the b3 and a2 pawns. So yeah, you know, not bad. So rook b1 was played, and here maybe, I mean, what Janowski did was very, very natural, absolutely natural. But you know, thinking about it and looking at what the engines want, it probably was not a good idea. What the engines want actually is to play this move bishop d8, and it's quite interesting actually, because black's idea is that after h3 you go king f8, play a little h5 just to give you the possibility to play h4, just you know, pin those pawns to light squares, king f3, and you go king e7. and actually you just come around here, and the idea is you've got this queenside pawn majority, so there's no point in having the king over here. You want this king supporting those pawns. It didn't lead to a win for black, but I think it's a very promising idea. Very, very nice idea for black to do that. What Janowski did was to take on b3 and play rook a2. Very natural. You're just opening the open file, activating the rook. The only problem is that in this position, this bishop is actually sort of looking at a pawn on a2 beyond the b3 pawn, and with a move bishop d8, you're defending the pawn on b6. So after b takes a4, rook a4, you've got a pawn on a2 to attack. When you go a takes b3, there's no a2 pawn, so actually white could play the move b3 to b4 here, and get that pawn off the off a light square. And after c4 you can go rook c1, and actually that c4 pawn is kind of hard to defend. So yeah, I mean, actually it's a very natural move what Janowski did, but not really the most accurate, because it just gives white the opportunity to play a move like b4. However, Marshall didn't do that. A little bit surprising. Maybe he just spotted that opportunity that he takes, which is also quite interesting, which is to play the move knight e8. And what Marshall is spotting is that he wants to go knight f6. You're probably not going to take that, because that would go to opposite coloured bishops. And then afterwards that knight is going to come round to d5, which is a pretty good square, really making use of those triple pawns in the centre, knight hopping from outpost to outpost. So rook a3, knight f6, maybe a little bit weird king g7 was played. You could just go king f8, which looks quite natural as well. But king g7 played, knight d5, and now bishop d8 and bishop e1. And here actually, the engines were more or less saying, well, black's defensive structure here is, white's defensive structure rather, is pretty good. We should probably just stay, and just sort of fiddle around with the king really, and just try and work out, well, how on earth is black going to make anything of this? But what actually happened here was that somehow Marshall, played pretty well up till now. I mean, going into this endgame, giving up the bishop pair like that was not particularly good. But since then, he's actually played, very, very reasonably here. But all of a sudden, he goes a little bit bananas and starts off with h4, which is a weird one because, Janowski replied with h6. But simply g takes h4, looks pretty good, really. We're going to have h3 and we're going to create a pass pawn at some stage, or the king now gets a nice entry point into g5, g4. The rook can come back to a2. G takes h4 would have just been a very strong move. The engines give it +5 or something. So that was a weird one. I mean, I understand Janowski's move. He just wants to keep control. I imagine, to be honest, that Janowski thought that he was already much, much better here, and that he was just keeping control. The engines say, oh, actually, it's just about even. White can just wait. But that's, that's not easy to really determine in a practical game. I can understand where Janowski's coming from. But what Marshall did here was play b4. And that's a little bit odd, really, because black can play c4 now. And, you can support the pawn with the c4 pawn with b5 if you attack it. And you've also got a threat of bishop d5 and rook e3 now, for example. And then this pawn will be weak as well. You're opening up the line of the rook along the third rank. You're giving black a past protected c4 pawn. Just really a little bit weird there. I'm not quite sure what Marshall missed. And he played knight c3. Presumably that was to try and stop black from playing b5. But Janowski played rook b3. Here again, Marshall did something a little bit weird, really, because he could play rook c1 threaten at some stage, for example, knight d5, and then attack this c pawn again. But he played the move king f2, and this just allowed, this gave Janowski all the freedom he needed, just to play bishop c7. And White's just put the pieces in such a way, just in the last 2 or 3 moves, that you can't defend the pawn on e5, and now it's total collapse. I mean, this bishop was struggling to get active, but now it's getting active on the e5 square, you know, central, looking both ways. Black's got a passed pawn, 2 bishops against knight and bishop, you know, I mean, it's just killing somehow. So really kind of inexplicable 2 or 3 weak moves there from Marshall after having played quite well. And, you know, Marshall's another player who's got a reputation as a poor endgame player. But, you know, that's mainly because he was, you know, he often got ground down by Emanuel Lasker. But, yeah, you know, that was what Emanuel Lasker did in much the same way that Magnus Carlsen does this in the modern game. But yeah, I mean, he also played some pretty good endgame players. He was no weak endgame player by any means, but here just defensively, yeah, really let it all fall apart really. And well, Janowski with his 2 bishops, he loved his 2 bishops, and yeah, you know, this was an absolute dream position. So this pawn is sort of keeping white honest. He's got to keep some pieces to stop the pawn from advancing, and well, meanwhile. Black's just taking the pawn on the other side and just advancing the g-pawn. G3, bishop takes e4, g2, bishop f3, king there, and well, it's all going to be finished. Bishop g4, and then king h2 is going to be coming in, or king f2. Actually, Marshall played king e3, f6, and white's in Zugzwang. You basically have to move the king away, and then the king comes in. So that was quite. I thought that was quite an interesting game. Wasn't anything you know, stunning or crazy as we've seen in so many of Janowski's game, but I think it gives you know, a good example of the strength of his endgame play in relation to you know, the top players of his generation. And yeah, I mean, basically, it doesn't seem that inferior to me. It's yeah, you know, it's just that he wasn't the standard of a Capablanca or a Lasker, but yeah, not many players of that generation were. What I particularly like, to be honest, I like that very much, this move, rook d3. You know, just getting ahead of knight d6, and then, you know, if white plays knight d6, well, everything's happening, you know, behind black, and black's already launched for fighting against the white position. And I thought, you know, this whole maneuver from him, you know, just showing excellent ideas about, you know, where he should target the firepower against white's position. Just give up this e4 pawn and just target your firepower against the queen side. And yeah, some interesting things from the engine as well. Interesting that this move AB was wrong, but once you see it, you understand why. And also, you know, I liked very much this this plan of the engine, just to play bishop d8 and move the king across to the queen side to support the pawns. I think that's a very nice in-game technique thing. And yeah, you know, just interesting to see that the engine thought that you know, in this kind of position, that white could have just stayed still and not done anything. But you know, when Marshall lost his nerve, Janowski put him away without any problem there at all. So there we are, just a little bit of endgame play there to refresh the palate after all that crazy stuff. But there'll be plenty more crazy stuff in the next few videos to admire. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that one. If you liked it, why don't give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at my new book, Reengineering the Chess Classics, written together with my childhood coach Steve Giddins. And otherwise, you know, thanks for watching, thanks for being part of this channel, and hope to see you at the next video. Thanks for watching.